Did you know that the original Shure SM7 microphone came out in 1973? It's only had 2 updates since then, bringing us to 2001's SM7B, which is arguably the most famous broadcast and podcast microphone of all time. And with the rise of pretty much everybody having a podcast or a YouTube channel these days, this mic is insanely popular right now. But there's still one big problem with the SM7B. But here we are, 22 years later, and Shure has finally addressed the issue with the brand new SM7db that I'm speaking into right now. So, secure the cup, and let's talk about it. First of all, let's talk about the elephant in the room. Why are the SM7 and SM7B so popular in the first place? The answer isn't really that difficult, and in my opinion, it comes down to 3 different things. First, it's an excellent sounding microphone that produces a flattering, not overly hyped sound. And part of that sound is the fact that it handles dynamics in an incredibly smooth way as well. One of my favorite uses for the SM7B was for rock and pop vocalists who I knew had a huge range of dynamics because I had no doubt that this mic would be able to handle it. And if you've ever heard a little song called Billie Jean, you'll get to hear what I'm talking about because producer Bruce Swedien would use an SM7 on Michael Jackson's vocal for that song and so many others, even though it wasn't necessarily thought of as a vocal mic for singers, it was more of a broadcast style mic. And when you first step up to one of these mics and hear yourself with headphones on, you go, whoa, I sound kind of epic. Now, I will say that at this point, part of the reason that we all like the sound of this microphone so much might have something to do with the fact that we're so used to hearing it, but even way back when, it was still a great sounding mic. The second part of the popularity comes down to the fact that it has excellent off-axis cancellation, which means that it only picks up what's directly in front of it. It makes it an absolute pleasure when you get to mixing. It was always one of my favorite microphones to use when I was recording an entire live band because I knew I could get that vocal somewhat isolated. And the third part has to do with the design of the yoke system. It's a unique way of mounting a microphone that makes the SM7 really handy for putting on a microphone stand and kind of flying it in. And before a whole bunch of copycat microphones started to pile up in the last handful of years, this was a fairly uncommon design, making the SM7 a unique mounting solution. Again, more geared towards broadcast and radio. So if the SM7B was so fantastic, what was that problem that I keep talking about? Well, if you ever try to plug in an SM7B directly to a preamp or interface that doesn't have a wild amount of input gain, you might actually not be able to get it loud enough. Because the SM7B is a dynamic microphone and not a condenser microphone, the output is naturally lower. But on top of that, the SM7B was particularly low even in that category. So usually what gets suggested is that you buy something called a cloudlifter that looks like this. This is a gain booster that goes in between your microphone and your preamp using an extra XLR cable. It uses 48 volt phantom power supplied by the preamp to increase the volume of the microphone by up to 25 decibels while still adding very little signal noise so that you can set your preamp to a reasonable level. There are some preamps out there that have enough gain built into them to handle the SM7B, but if you have a fairly basic consumer interface like my Focusrite Scarlett 2i4 here, you're just not going to get enough gain. And potentially the biggest pain with this cloudlifter system is that you needed to add this chunky separate accessory and spend even more money on an already not super inexpensive microphone just to get it to function how you want it to. And this is exactly why the new SM7db is so exciting. You no longer need a separate cloudlifter because they've built a preamp directly into the microphone. If we take a look at the back of the SM7db, we'll see 4 different switches. The 2 familiar ones are the low frequency cut that removes any unwanted bass frequencies and rumbling that you might get. This switch can also help with proximity effect, which is when the subject gets very close to the microphone, the bass frequencies can get to be a bit too much. So for people who like to talk really close to a microphone or who have very low bass heavy voices, this can be helpful. The other familiar switch is the mid-range enhancer. It pretty much does what it says on the tin. It boosts some of those mid-range frequencies, which happen to be where a lot of human voice frequencies sit, so it can help the voice to stand out more. But let's take a second to listen to what these switches do to the sound. Am I more than you bargained for yet? I've been dying to tell you anything you want to hear. because that's just who I am this week. Personally, the low cut filter is a bit stronger than I typically like for my voice, and it's a bit different than what you may have experienced from other low cut filters. A lot of them hit around 100 hertz to just stop any rumbling or air conditioners going on in the background, whereas this one has it set to 300 hertz, which really does make a significant difference on the voice, since many voices actually do go that low. Am I more than you bargained for yet? I've been dying to tell you anything that you want to hear, because that's just who I am this week. And the mid-range emphasis feels a bit intense on my voice as well, because most of my frequencies are already pretty strong in that frequency range. So for me, I think the flat response is the way to go, but the mileage is going to vary depending on the source that you put in front of it. Am I more than you bargained for yet? I've been dying to tell you anything you want to hear, because that's just who I am this week. Am I more than you bargained for yet? I've been dying to tell you anything you want to hear, because that's just who I am this week. Am I more than you bargained for yet? I've been dying to tell you anything that you want to hear, because that's just who I am this week. Am I more than you bargained for yet? I've been dying to tell you anything you want to hear, because that's just who I am this week. And then we've got the new exciting switches on the bottom. On the left, we see the preamp bypass switch, which is great because you can just use this microphone in all its original glory, just as we would have known from the SM7B, or when you engage the preamp, you can get that extra boost. When this switch is in bypass, it's literally the exact same microphone as the SM7B. Same internal, same everything. The only difference is going to happen once you engage that preamp. And beyond that, they've also given you options for how much boost you can engage. I mentioned before that the cloudlifter claims to be up to 25 decibels, while the SM7db has a boost of either 18 decibels or 28 decibels, depending on what your source is and what you need for your preamp. So if you've got a really quiet source, you can crank it all the way up, or if you've got someone screaming into the thing, you can pull that back. The build quality is robust and fantastic, just like these mics have always been. It's built like a tank, and it comes with a smaller windscreen or a thicker one if you're outdoors, or if you're worried that someone has heavy plosives, if they're blowing a lot into the mic, then you can use the bigger one. So now it's possible to get that SM7B sound that everybody loves without all the extra headache of the cloudlifter. But we live in a world where there are a bunch of really solid alternatives that are much less expensive than this mic, so let's take a listen and see if the SM7db is that much better. For this test, we're going to be comparing the Shure SM7db against the Rode PodMic and Shure's very own MV7 microphone, both of which cost about half of what the SM7db does, but are marketed to the same podcasting demographic. We'll be putting all of them through my Focusrite Scarlett 2i4, since that's a pretty common interface, and using the cloudlifter where necessary. I highly recommend that you listen to this either on decent headphones or decent speakers so that you can actually hear the difference. I remember when I lost my mind. There was something so pleasant about that place. Even your emotions had an echo in so much space. I remember when I lost my mind. There was something so pleasant about that place. Even your emotions have an echo in so much space. I remember when I lost my mind. There was something so pleasant about that place. Even your emotions have an echo in so much space. I remember when I lost my mind. There was something so pleasant about that place. Even your emotions have an echo in so much space. I remember when I lost my mind. There was something so pleasant about that place. Even your emotions have an echo in so much space. I remember when I lost my mind. There was something so pleasant about that place. Even your emotions have an echo in so much space. I remember when I lost my mind. There was something so pleasant about that place. Even your emotions have an echo in so much space. Okay, so there are a few things that we need to talk about there, and one that I really wasn't expecting. But first things first, let me know down in the comments what you think. Which one was your favorite from the test that you just heard? One quick note, the Rode mic did also require me to use the cloudlifter to get enough gain for my normal speaking voice, so keep that in mind with that mic specifically. The MV7 didn't need the cloudlifter for my voice, but the preamp was cranked almost all the way up, so if you have a really quiet speaker or something like that, you may want to go with the cloudlifter too. I did also test the MV7 with the cloudlifter, but the difference in sound wasn't significant. It just gave more flexibility to turn up the preamp more if I wanted to. Overall, my personal favorite sounding mic for this test was the SM7db, and actually by a bigger margin than I was expecting. It had the most pleasing tone to my ear, but it also felt the most natural or easy to listen to. The Rode mic felt a little bit honky in the mid-range, but I still liked it enough, and the MV7 was super boomy and had way too much low end for my taste. The difference between the sound in the built-in preamp on the SM7db and the cloudlifter was minimal to my ear, except that the cloudlifter seemed to introduce a bit less noise. Not a huge difference, but it was there. And speaking of noise, that was the one thing that really surprised me from these tests. Both the SM7db and the Rode mic had a bit of a hissing noise going on with them, but the MV7 had a significantly cleaner signal. Even when I had to crank up my preamp to use it without the cloudlifter, it had less noise than the others. With all that said, I would definitely recommend the Shure SM7db for a few reasons. First of all, it just sounds the best to me. If I find it a bit too noisy, I can add a little bit of denoiser in post, but the actual tone of the microphone was my favorite. Secondly, as we saw, even though the Rode mic came close in tone, you still need the cloudlifter with that mic to get enough extra gain, so now we're talking about that same extra money and extra parts problem we used to have with the SM7B. Now, the SM7db might still be more expensive, but it's more simple in that way. And thirdly, like I mentioned before, the SM7db is built like a tank, and it stood the test of time in a ton of different studios. Now, even though the SM7db is my favorite, I still feel quite confident suggesting the Rode mic as a more budget-friendly option here, because the sound is close and the build still seems great. It has a few less options, but you can also get a USB version if you want that, which is nice. But if the budget allows for it, I definitely recommend the SM7db. And you can check out all of these mics as well as the cloudlifter down at the links in the description. And again, let me know what your favorite was down in the comments, and if you don't want to decide right now, one thing that you can do is hit the like button, subscribe, and watch this video that YouTube thinks that you'll like next. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Does that make me crazy? Probably.